another gut punch that makes it that much harder for them to provide for themselves and their families. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
I rise for two purposes. One, to discuss the National Defense Authorization Act and the fact that we can't offer amendments to it and the process that has deteriorated in the Senate for deliberation. And secondly, I would speak very shortly about the nomination of Mayorkas, one of the first nominees we'll be voting on this week. The Senate is poised to vote on a final National Defense Authorization Act after considering only two amendments. The Senate has not been functioning like it should for some time, and the way that the National Defense Authorization Act has been handled is just one example. I've served in the majority and the minority with Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, so I've seen it operate from every perspective. What's unique about the Senate is that the rules, as well as the traditions, force senators to work together. That leads senators to understand where the other side is coming from, resulting in mutual respect and scrutiny. I hear from a lot of Iowans who are upset at the tone they hear in Washington and the lack of bipartisanship. I've often said that the Senate functions best when no party has more than about 55 seats. If you have much more than that, there is less of a tendency to want to work in a bipartisan fashion. That was true for most of my time in the Senate, but not now. Despite a current margin of just 5 seats in the Senate, there has been very little bipartisan cooperation. I suppose some Democratic senators really believe it when they say that this is all Republicans' fault. I think anyone who remembers how the Senate used to operate and has paid attention to how the current majority leadership has been running things, in fact, knows better. In fairness, quite a few members of the Senate don't remember how the Senate is supposed to operate because it has been dysfunctional ever since they were elected. Some senators previously served in the House of Representatives, where the majority party controls everything that happens. In the House of Representatives, the Rules Committee sets out the terms of debate for each bill. If you want to offer an amendment in the House, you have to go hat in hand to the Rules Committee and say, "Mother, may I?" If the House leadership doesn't like your amendment, quite frankly, you're out of luck. If that sounds familiar, that's because it is how the current Senate leadership has been running things lately here in the Senate. We have seen an absolutely unprecedented use, or I should say abuse, of cloture motions paired with a tactic called filling the tree to block amendments from being considered. That not only affects the minority party, but Democratic senators are affected as well. I would say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, how many times have you had an amendment you wanted to offer that was important to your state, but you couldn't do it because amendments were blocked? The Senate Majority Leader has effectively become a one-man version of the House Rules Committee, dictating what amendments will be debated and which ones will never see the light of day. This strips the ability of individual senators to effectively represent their states, regardless of party. It also virtually guarantees that any legislation the Senate votes on will be more partisan in nature. I would ask my colleagues across the aisle, isn't your first responsibility to the people of your state, not to party leadership? Are you really content to cede to your party leader the trust and responsibility placed in you by the voters of your state? How much longer can you go along with this proposition? The people of Iowa sent me to the United States Senate to represent them, not simply vote up or down on a purely partisan agenda dictated by the majority leader. Everyone complains about the lack of bipartisanship these days, but there's no opportunity for individual senators to work across the aisle when legislation is drafted on a partisan basis and amendments are blocked. Bipartisanship requires giving individual senators a voice, regardless of party. When senators are only allowed to vote on items that are pre-approved by the majority leader, those senators lose the ability to effectively represent their state and, in the end, become mere tools of party leadership. It's no wonder Americans are so cynical about government right now. In the last decade, when I was chairman of the Finance Committee and Republicans controlled the Senate, we wanted to actually get things done. In order for that to happen, we knew that we had to accommodate the minority. We had to have patience, humility, and respect for the minority, attributes that don't exist on the other side anymore. And we had some major bipartisan accomplishments, from the largest tax cut in the history to a Medicare prescription drug program to numerous trade agreements. Those kinds of major bills don't happen anymore. The Senate rules provide that any senator may offer an amendment regardless of party affiliation. Each senator represents hundreds of thousands to millions of Americans, and each has an individual right to offer amendments for consideration. The principle here isn't about political parties having their say, but duly elected senators participating in the legislative process as imagined by the Constitution. Again, as part of our duty to represent the citizens of our respective states, each senator has an individual right to offer amendments. This right cannot be outsourced to party leadership. The long-standing tradition of the Senate is that members of the minority party, as well as rank-and-file members of the majority party, have an opportunity to offer amendments for a vote here in the Senate. That has historically been the case with the annual National Defense Authorization Act, the very bill that we're debating right now, but not this year. It typically takes a couple of weeks to consider the National Defense Authorization Act. This year, the majority party leadership chose to wait until a week before the scheduled Thanksgiving recess to bring it up, leaving little time for customary open debate and amendment process. Once the defense bill was brought up, rather than promptly starting to process amendments, the majority leader immediately blocked amendments so that he could control what came up for a vote. Obviously, the Senate ground to a halt, wasting time that we didn't have when we could have been considering amendments from both sides of the aisle. This process, as everyone here in the Senate knows, is called filling the tree, where the majority leader offers blocker amendments that block any other senator from offering their own amendment, unless the majority leader agrees to set aside his blocker amendment so other amendments can be offered. Filling the tree doesn't appear anywhere in the Senate rules. It's based upon combining two precedents: the precedent that the majority leader has a first right of recognition by the presiding officer, and the precedent that only one first-degree and one second-degree amendment can be pending at any one time. Basically, the majority leader abuses his prerogative to cut in line and offer an amendment that does nothing more than simply say, changing the enacting date by 1 day, for instance. That then blocks any other senator from exercising his right to offer an amendment. This so-called filling the tree tactic used to be relatively rare, but it has become routine under current leadership. This way, the Democratic leadership can prevent other senators from offering amendments that they don't want to have to vote on. Then, with amendments blocked, the majority leader makes a motion to bring debate to a close, or around here that's called cloture. When cloture is invoked, it sets up a limited time before a final vote must take place. By keeping amendments blocked while running out the clock, the majority leader can force a final vote on a bill without having to consider any amendments other than amendments that the majority leader might approve. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that members of the minority party who wish to offer amendments will vote against a motion to end debate until their amendments have been considered. When Republicans vote against the Democrat leader's motion to end debate, we are accused of launching a filibuster. In other words, unless we give up our right to participate fully in the legislative process, the other side says that we are filibustering. Does that really count as a filibuster? Well, no. The Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service answers this question and has a very helpful report on cloture motions and filibusters that make this point very clear. The CRS report is entitled Cloture Attempts on Nominations, Data and Historical Development, and the title, by Richard S. Beth, contained an entire section called Cloture Motions Do Not Correspond with Filibusters. It starts out, quote, although cloture affords the Senate a means for overcoming a filibuster, it is erroneous to assume that cases in which cloture is sought are always the same as those in which filibuster occurs. Filibusters may occur without cloture being sought, and cloture may be sought when no filibuster is taking place. The reason is that cloture is sought by supporters of matters, whereas filibusters are conducted by its opponents. It then goes on to explain various scenarios to illustrate this point. Several members of the majority have made a point of trying to confuse cloture motions with filibusters. We hear constantly that there have been an unprecedented number of Republican filibusters. They often point to a chart that purports to tally the number of filibusters and say that this is evidence of abuse of the Senate rules by the minority. The number they quote is the number of cloture motions, not the number of filibusters. It's true that there have been a record number of cloture motions, and I also agree that the number amounts to an egregious abuse of Senate rules. But again, very significant difference. Cloture motions do not correspond with filibusters. Cloture motions are filed by the majority party leadership, not by the minority party. This abuse of cloture is a major cause of the Senate's current dysfunction. Again, this abuse of cloture, often combined with the blocking of amendments, prevents all senators from doing what they were sent here to do, not just members of the minority party. And it's gotten even worse. Even where the majority leader has decided he's going to be open to amendments, he has created out of whole cloth new restrictions to limit senators' rights. First, he normally only opens up the amendment process if there's an agreement to limit amendments. And this is usually only a handful or so. Then he has magically determined that only germane or relevant amendments can be considered. Of course, nowhere do the Senate rules require this other than post-cloture. Senators elected in the last few years appear to be ignorant of that fact. You'll hear some senators here argue against an amendment saying it's non-germane or non-relevant. They've totally fallen for the majority leader's creative rulemaking, thus giving up one of their rights as a senator with which to represent their state. I can't count on how many non-germane or non-relevant amendments I had to allow voted on when I processed bills when Republicans were in the majority. They were usually tough political votes, but we took them because we wanted to get things done. We wanted the Senate to function. No, you don't see that nowadays. The current majority leader avoids tough votes at all costs, and that's why we don't get much done around here. The American people sent us here to represent them. That means voting, not avoiding tough votes. We sometimes hear that this is a question of majority rule versus minority obstruction. Again, that ignores that each senator is elected to represent their state, not simply to be an agent of the other party. While the majority of senators may be from one party, they represent very different states, and agendas of the majority leader will not always be consistent with their interests of their states. When one individual, the Senate Majority Leader, controls what comes up for a vote, that is not majority rule. In fact, there are policies that have majority support in the United States Senate that have been denied a vote. What happened during Senate debate on the budget resolution this year seems to prove that point. The special rules of the budget resolution limit debate so it can't be filibustered, but allow for unlimited number of amendments. A Republican amendment to support repealing the tax on life-saving medical devices in President Obama's health care law passed by an overwhelming 79-20 vote, with more than half of the Democrats voting with the Republicans rather than with their party leader. A Republican amendment in support of the approval of Keystone XL pipeline to bring oil from Canada passed 62-37. Now, those are two examples, because votes like these that split the Democrats and hand a win to majority are exactly what the majority leader has been trying to avoid by blocking amendments. That's why the Senate didn't take up a budget resolution for more than 3 years. Still, the budget resolution isn't a law, so unless legislation on those issues is allowed to come up for a vote, nothing will happen despite the support of the vast majority of the United States Senate, as demonstrated by those two roll calls I just mentioned. As a case in point now, we're on the National Defense Authorization Act that we're considering now. One of the amendments in the majority leader bloc would have imposed sanctions on the Iranian regime. Everyone knew that this amendment enjoys broad bipartisan support and would have passed easily had it been allowed a vote to take place. It had majority support, but the Senate was not allowed to work its will. So why? The Iranian sanctions amendment was blocked because the President opposed it, and it would have been a tough vote that divided the majority party. Now, is that a valid reason for shutting down the traditional open amendment process for the defense bill? I don't think so. Until we put an end to the abuse of cloture and the blocking of amendments, the Senate cannot function properly, and the American people will continue to lack representation that they're entitled to. As I said, I had just a short remarks on the Mayorkas nomination. I spoke to great lengths on this yesterday, and I won't speak to great lengths today, but I have concern with Mr. Mayorkas' nomination, and so I have additional information today from my colleagues. Today, the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security released an embargoed version of its audit of the EB-5 immigrant investor visa program. The report states that the U.S. Customs Immigration Service has difficulty ensuring the integrity of the program and does not always ensure that regional centers meet all eligibility requirements. Specifically, the report said, quote, the U.S. Customs Immigration Service did not always enforce its own regulations and procedures to assist with managing the regional center programs, end of that quote. Another quote, until improvements are made, U.S. Customs Immigration Service is unable to prevent fraud and national security threats, end of quote. Another quote, it cannot report the results of the program accurately or ensure the EB-5 program is benefiting the U.S. economy and creating jobs for U.S. citizens as created by Congress, end of that quote. Now, you understand Mr. Mayorkas is in charge of these programs. The IG said that the agency needed to improve coordination and rely on the expertise of other agencies. The IG had several recommendations for the U.S. Customs Immigration Service that, frankly, should have been in place before now if the director was doing his job. In his comments on the draft report, Mr. Mayorkas claimed that he was already addressing the issues in the Inspector General's that the Inspector General raised. He said his agency had, quote, dramatically enhanced collaboration with key government partners, end of quote, meaning he was cooperating with the FBI. He also wrote that when his agency has concerns with EB-5 cases, it doesn't decide the cases until it has, quote, fully coordinated its approach with enforcement and intelligence partners, end of quote. I've seen examples of this so-called coordination that Mr. Mayorkas talks about. But again, his words don't comport with the actual practice. When Homeland Security's Law Enforcement Database, TECS, has a hit on someone applying for a regional center, Customs Immigration Service sends an email to the law enforcement agency that put the record in. But the problem is that the Customs Immigration Service isn't waiting for law enforcement to make an investigation. In fact, information has come to my attention that CIS employees are told to move forward if law enforcement doesn't respond within just 5 days. Now, that's just 5 days to find out what sensitive security or fraud information caused that person to be flagged. If law enforcement doesn't get back to the Customs Immigration Service soon enough, then that agency just goes ahead and the person's application is approved. Now, that's not coordination. That coordination is a sham. And that should be simply unacceptable to any of us that are concerned about the national security of our country. It's not the sort of way to run a program with national security vulnerabilities. Everybody should wait until the law enforcement responds. You need to know who's coming into this country or not, and particularly when they're involved in a program where you buy your way into the country by buying a visa because you're supposed to be investing in this country and creating jobs in this country. But for some people that may want to get into this country for ulterior motives that may violate our national security, they don't care about creating jobs, but if it gets them inside the country, they get here. So you got to know whether they're a threat to our national security. The only reason that the Customs Immigration Service even does check on regional centers at all is because of a push within that agency that Mr. Mayorkas and his management resisted. Now they're trying to take credit for it. More important is what his agency has not done. They refuse to kick out regional centers that invite national security problems. Mr. Mayorkas claims that he doesn't have statutory authority, but the Inspector General audit recommended that Mr. Mayorkas should make clear on his own that fraud and national security concerns are a reason for regional centers to be kicked out of the program. The bottom line is that Mr. Mayorkas has not taken the steps that were within his power to guard against security vulnerabilities in the EB-5 program. The Inspector General's audit report concludes, quote, currently, U.S. Customs Immigration Service cannot administer and manage the EB-5 regional centers program effectively, end of quote. Mr. Mayorkas has had ample notice of these problems for years. He has failed to take adequate action. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that privileges of the floor be granted to Margaret Lorenowitz on December 19th.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I request unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, at the end of this year, 1.3 million Americans will be cut off from their federal unemployment benefits at the hardest time of the year. 1.3 million people will lose the lifeline they've relied on to support their families while they struggle to find jobs in this challenging economic climate. Unfortunately, for 170,000 North Carolinians, this has already been a reality. Earlier this year, the North Carolina General Assembly slashed unemployment benefits, making North Carolina the only state in the nation to actually stop receiving federal emergency unemployment insurance, the only state in the nation. This irresponsible and cold-hearted action by the General Assembly has been devastating to the thousands of individuals and families across my state who are already struggling to make ends meet. Sidney Houston is one of 170,000 jobless North Carolinians who would have received federal unemployment benefits were it not for this new state law. A month after the law was enacted and Sidney no longer had her benefits, she told a North Carolina TV station that she was ironing her clothes in preparation for a job interview when her electricity was cut off because she couldn't pay her bills. It's been excruciating, she said, adding that she feared her landlord knocking on her door to evict her at any moment. People have to understand that these extended federal unemployment insurance benefits help these families pay for their rent, pay for their food, and pay for their electricity, just like in Sidney's case. I also received a letter from Sherry Harmon, another North Carolina woman. Let me give you her quote. She said in her letter, "I have lived in North Carolina my entire life, and I felt proud of my state. This has changed drastically now." Sherry was laid off from her job at a law firm, and her husband, Rick, lost his job just a month later. Sherry was drawing unemployment while searching for work and attending classes at Central Piedmont Community College in Charlotte. She was in her third semester of school when she found out that her unemployment would end. We are at risk of losing everything we've worked for in the 24 years we've been married, Sherry told me. I am completely lost. We have heard so many stories like this from Sidney's and Sherry's, just like those from many people across North Carolina. What is more, North Carolina tax dollars are going to unemployed workers in every other state across the nation except for North Carolina. Our citizens are paying their federal taxpayer dollars for federal unemployment benefits to 49 other states, even though our citizens cannot rely on this same safety net. This is not only unfair, it's hurting my state, which continues to have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country at 8%. Some of the rural counties in North Carolina are up to 14.5%. As the Senate considers an extension of the emergency unemployment insurance program, I believe it is crucial that we right the wrong that has been done to North Carolinians through no fault of their own. For this reason, Mr. President, I come to the floor today to express my thanks to my colleagues, especially Majority Leader Reid, Senator Max Baucus, and Senator Jack Reed, for working with me to ensure that North Carolina's needs will be addressed as we work to extend unemployment insurance benefits into 2014. I would also urge my colleagues not to leave their constituents to the same fate as the citizens of my state, and to swiftly pass the Emergency Unemployment Compensation Extension Act. This bipartisan legislation introduced by Senators Reid and Heller would extend federal unemployment insurance benefits, and it would restore North Carolina's eligibility to participate in the program. We must continue to work on bipartisan policies that will boost job creation and get Americans back into our workforce. We need educational institutions, local employers, and job training centers to join forces to ensure that unemployed workers are being trained for the job opportunities that are available right now. I have a bill called the America Works Act that would do just that. It would close the skills gap that has been plaguing our country, and it would take the guessing game out of hiring. The America Works Act would ensure that community colleges and job training programs develop curricula that will lead to portable, industry-recognized credentials that will help make and help train our unemployed workers so that they would be outstanding applicants for jobs that are available in their local communities right now. In the meantime, as the unemployed struggle to get by while they look for jobs, we should not cut them off from the safety net that has served as their last lifeline for taking care of their families and putting food on the table. And we should make certain that the unemployed in North Carolina have that same opportunity once again, in spite of the action taken by the North Carolina General Assembly. I am glad to be joining my colleagues in pushing to extend the unemployment insurance for both North Carolinians and people across our country. There is no reason to wait any longer to pass this critical legislation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I want to take this opportunity to thank Senators Levin and Inhofe and the Committee on Armed Services for their very hard work on the Department of Defense authorization bill. Unfortunately, I must vote against it, and I want to take this opportunity to explain why I am voting no and to express my very serious concerns about our nation's bloated military budget, particularly in light of the many unmet needs we face as a nation. At a time when the United States has a $17.2 trillion national debt, and when we spend almost as much on defense as the rest of the world combined, the time is long overdue for us to take a hard look at the waste, at the cost overruns, at the financial mismanagement that have plagued the Department of Defense for decades. As a point of comparison, the International Institute for Strategic Studies estimates total global military spending in 2012 at $1.583 trillion. The United States portion of that spending is over 40%, $645 billion. In other words, Mr. President, the United States is spending almost as much as the rest of the world combined on defense. We are spending about $645 billion. China spends $102 billion. The United Kingdom spends $64 billion. Russia spends $59 billion, and other countries spend less. According to the Washington Post, since 2001, the base defense budget has soared from $287 billion to $530 billion, and that is before accounting for the primary costs of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, end of quote, Washington Post. In addition to the trillions spent on the war in Iraq and what seems to be a never-ending war in Afghanistan, the Department of Defense consistently engages in wasteful, inefficient, and often fraudulent spending. At my request several years ago, the Department of Defense issued a report detailing the breadth of fraud that exists within the Pentagon, the simple issue of massive fraud. The report showed that the Pentagon paid over $573 billion during the past 10 years to more than 300 contractors involved in civil fraud cases that resulted in judgments of more than $1 million, $398 billion of which was awarded after settlement or judgment for fraud. When awards to parent companies are counted, the Pentagon paid more than $1.1 trillion during the past 10 years just to the 37 top companies engaged in fraud. Bottom line is, Mr. President, that almost every major defense contractor in this country has, in one way or another, been involved in fraudulent dealings with the taxpayers of this country and the Department of Defense. Further, above and beyond fraud, the waste at the Pentagon is rampant. And we can go on for many hours just documenting the waste, but let me give you just a few of the kinds of wastes that the Pentagon regularly engages in. These are just a very few examples. In July 2013, the Pentagon decided to build a 64,000-square-foot command headquarters for the U.S. military in Afghanistan that will not be utilized or even occupied. Even though the $34 million project was deemed unwanted by military commanders 3 years ago, the military still moved ahead with construction. One example. Just another example. According to a report released by the Department of Defense Inspector General this year, the Pentagon has been paying contractor Boeing more than $3,357 for a piece of hardware they could have purchased from their own hardware store, the Defense Logistics Agency, for $15.42. Seems to me be a pretty good deal to get a product for $15 that you're paying over $3,000 for, but that is the way the Pentagon runs. Furthermore, another issue, the July 2013 Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction report includes the purchase of over $771 million of aircraft that the Afghans will be unable to operate and maintain. The Afghan Special Mission Wing has only 1/4 of the personnel needed to maintain and operate the fleet, and there are no existing DoD plans to reach full strength. The Pentagon is moving forward with purchases. Most of that money, $553 million, has been awarded to a Russian company that also sells weapons to Syria. And these are just a few examples. Needless to say, there are many more. A recent article in Mother Jones has some interesting numbers about our military spending. According to the article, 70% of the value of the federal government's $1.8 trillion in property, land, and equipment belongs to the Pentagon. The American people will no doubt be interested in understanding that the Pentagon operates more than 170 golf courses worldwide. At a time when we now spend almost as much as the rest of the world combined on defense, we can make judicious cuts in our armed forces without compromising our military capability. I think everybody in the United States Congress believes and understands that we need a strong defense. No debate about that. But we do not need a defense budget that is bloated, that is wasteful, and that has in it many areas of fraud. Madam President, in this respect, I hope my Republican colleagues, and in fact all of my colleagues, remember what former President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a good Republican, said on April 16, 1953, just as he was leaving office. What he said then was profound, and it is as true today as when he said it 60 years ago. And this is what he said. He said, and I quote, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed." This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron, end of quote. And I would just ask all of my colleagues to remember what Eisenhower said, and understand that today, when we have this bloated and huge military budget, there are people who are talking about massive cuts in food stamps, massive cuts in education, massive cuts in affordable housing, cuts in Social Security, cuts in Medicare, cuts in Medicaid. And I would argue, Madam President, very strongly, that before we cut from the elderly and the children and the sick and the poor, maybe we take a hard look at this bloated military budget. Now, that is my view, but let me mention to you what the Cato Institute has to say. Not Bernie Sanders, but the Cato Institute, one of the most conservative organizations in this country. Here is what the Cato Institute said on May 3rd, 2013. And by the way, as I think most people know, my views are as far apart as possible from the Cato Institute on most issues. This is what the Cato Institute said, and I quote, and some of my conservative Republican friends might want to pay attention to this. Quote, U.S. military spending is far too excessive for legitimate defense needs. After sequestration, we will still spend more on defense against much less severe threats than at the peak of the Cold War. The U.S. now accounts for 44% of all global military spending. Put another way, the U.S. spends nearly as much on the military as the rest of the world combined. 20% of the U.S. federal budget is devoted to military spending, while the average, and this is an important point made by Cato, while the average for our NATO allies is a mere 3.6%. 5% of U.S. annual GDP is allocated to the military, but for the NATO countries, Japan and China, it is well below 2%. Today, the amount Washington spends on the military each year is $2,300 a person in the U.S. The comparable obligation for the average NATO country is $503 a person. For China, it is less than $200 a person, end of quote. That is not Bernie Sanders. That is the Cato Institute. Madam President, the situation is so absurd that the Pentagon is unable to even account for how it spends its money. Earlier this year, the Government Accountability Office cited its inability, that's the GAO's inability, to audit the Pentagon. They wrote that they were unable to do a comprehensive financial analysis due to, and I quote, serious financial management problems at the Department of Defense that made its financial statements unauditable, end of quote. That's from the Government Accountability Office. So we are voting for a budget that the GAO says they cannot even audit for the most expensive agency in government. Madam President, let me now quote from an article that appeared in the Washington Post on August 29, 2013. The defense budget, a purposefully opaque document, includes what is known as the black budget, and the information I am providing here comes from the Washington Post. $52.6 billion that funds the CIA, NSA, and other secret intelligence agencies. The CIA, NSA, and National Reconnaissance Office receive more than 68% of the black budget, with the NSA receiving $10.8 billion annually. At a time when the NSA has been engaging in what I consider to be unconstitutional activities, widespread collection of American citizens' data, I think we can find the ability to make some cuts in what they are doing. Madam President, I support a strong defense for our country and a robust National Guard and Reserve that can meet our domestic and foreign challenges. The National Guard provides a well-trained, disciplined, and operationally ready force for a fraction of the cost that active duty soldiers require. The reserve forces do not require nearly the same level of overhead in terms of full-time employment and infrastructure costs. So as we move forward trying to develop how we have a cost-effective defense, I think we should put a great deal of emphasis on our National Guard and on the reserve. Let me just conclude, Madam President, by saying this. In America today, our middle class is struggling. We have more people living in poverty than any time in the history of our country. Real unemployment is over 13%, youth unemployment 20%, African-American youth employment close to 40%. We have an infrastructure which is crumbling. We have large numbers of young people graduating from college deeply in debt. We have others who can't even afford to go to college because of the high cost of college. In other words, this country faces monumental problems, and on top of that, we have a $17.2 trillion national debt. It would seem to me, Madam President, that it's important that we get our priorities straight. And one of the priorities that we should be getting straight is that we cannot give the Department of Defense all that they want, and it is time to take a very, very hard look at that budget in a way that we have not done up to this point. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I ask unanimous consent that the senator from Massachusetts be recognized for 5 minutes, and then I follow with my comments until I complete them.
Without objection. Senator from Massachusetts.
I thank the presiding officer, and I thank the senator from Oklahoma. This final couple of days that we are going to be in session are very important because they are the days preceding the expiration of the wind energy tax break. It expires on December 31st. There are energy efficiency tax breaks that expire on December 31st. Now, this is unfortunate because these are industries that are rapidly growing. But let's take note here. If you're the oil industry or other older fossil fuel industries, your tax breaks are not expiring on December 31st. For the wind industry, for the renewable energy industry, we have to come back out here every year and try to get those tax breaks renewed. And each year, as we reach this December 31st date, we talk about a Congress just adjourning without completing it, sending total corporate unpredictability out into the marketplace, knowing that we need to have a robust, competitive marketplace. And so, honestly, Adam Smith is spinning in his grave as he watches a Senate expire without continuing the tax breaks for winds as the tax breaks for all of its competitive industries continue on. Year after year, they are permanent tax breaks. So actually, Adam Smith is spinning in his grave so rapidly that he would qualify for a permanent tax break because he would be generating so much energy, wondering how can you have such inconsistency? How can you have one source of energy have to come in almost like a mendicant each year, begging, and then having the year expire after having added 13,000 megawatts of new electricity to the grid last year, knowing that the entire nuclear industry only added 100,000 in 60 years, and here we are again. Those tax breaks are going to expire. We are going to leave here. We could not get unanimous consent in order to take them up here today to extend those tax breaks. And once again, the energy sources of the future, the innovative new energy sources pay the price. They're not allowed to be given permanent status or, as we leave here, any status at all as of the end of this year. So for young people in our country, for the green energy generation, they look and they ask, well, why can't we have our era's energy technologies given permanent tax breaks, or at least a year to year before you go home. Why can't you have that kind of a debate out here? And why is there a debate at all, to be honest with you, given the fact that there's $7 billion a year that's going to be given to the oil industry on permanent tax breaks? We're not looking for that for wind. We're looking at much smaller amounts of tax benefits. So from my perspective, I look at the warming planet, I look at the Chinese and others who are targeting wind sources. I was in China in 2009, and we rode by a wind factory with wind turbines, hundreds of them, and they were all, in a lot of ways, just pointing right at the American economy, in the same way that those Cuban missiles were pointing at our country in 1962, pointing right at us, a threat to us. But in the 21st century, it's a threat to our economy, because we're not investing in these new technologies in the way that we continue to invest in the old. The least it can be is and should be is a level playing field. Let's see who wins. Let's let capitalism work. Let's have this true Darwinian, paranoia-inducing capitalism that allows for winners to be selected based upon the same kind of tax breaks for everyone. If that's the case, I think everyone would be happy. But that's not the way it's going to be this year. And that's not the way it is most years. Permanent tax breaks for the older technologies and this kind of halting, questioning, capitalism killing, corporate questioning tax breaks for the nascent but growing and vibrant new technologies that the Chinese and Germans and Danes and others see as their job-creating sectors in their economy. So I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma for this opportunity, and I yield back to him.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Just to comment on my colleague from Massachusetts, he is correct that the tax credits for the wind energy are expiring, but he is incorrect in his ascertainment that all tax credits are the same. The tax credits in the oil and gas industry are deferred tax payments, and the $7 billion they collect this year in terms of deferred payments, in terms of intangible drilling costs, will in fact be made up for with $7 billion of payments from 10 years ago. So the net is zero, whereas the wind industry has a tax credit which the American consumer subsidizes to the tune of a significant amount, the value of the electricity that we get there. And so it is viable. If we were to put the wind energy tax credit the same as we have in the oil and gas industry, I'd happily support it, where it was a delayed capture of later revenues flowing back to the Treasury. But that's not what we want. We want to give a refundable tax credit directly to the wind energy, and it's not the same, and the apples are not the same. I come to the floor this evening really regrettably having to come and make the statement I'm making. In the last month, we've seen a lot of things happen in the Senate, which have led to other things happening in the Senate, and I don't think anybody's happy about it. But today, the leader's taking an unprecedented step, and I say that underlining the word unprecedented, of having the Senate vote on a nominee that is currently under active investigation. And I have no premonitions or knowledge about the facts, specific facts of that investigation, but what I do know in checking with the Senate historian, the Senate library, and the history of the Senate is that it's never been done before. It's never been done. So my reason in coming to the Senate is, number one, is to defend my position and what should be the position of the Senate, and to make the case to my colleagues that we're doing a disservice both to this nominee and to the department that he will fill. By all letters of recommendation, Alejandro Mayorkas is an honorable man. And President Obama is nominating the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. Under the new Senate rules, the minority has essentially no right to stop the majority from forcing through a nominee that possibly, just possibly, may be unfit for office on the basis of this investigation. And nobody's saying that he is. They're not saying no, they're saying wait. This is, in fact, the very act Republicans were afraid of when Leader Reid facilitated the change in the Senate rules by breaking the Senate rules. The Senate's going to cast this vote without knowledge, full knowledge of advice and consent on his fitness for his position. And we can do nothing to stop that. We realize that. The precedent that we're talking about is both historic and holding this vote in light of an active investigation into serious, relevant allegations of misconduct by any nominee appears to be virtually without any precedent in this body. We searched extensively for any precedent for the decision to hold a vote on this nomination. The Congressional Research Service studied this. It's never happened before. None. In fact, they discovered the opposite. The Senate has established a history and followed a practice that should lead us to postpone consideration of any nominee under investigation. Here's some examples they found. In January of 2005, President George Bush nominated Ken Tomlinson to be chairman of the Broadcasting Board of Governors. An active Inspector General's investigation into allegations of unethical behavior by Mr. Tomlinson led the Senate panel to delay action on the nomination for over 18 months. He was never confirmed. Later that same year, President Bush nominated Roland Arnault to the post of U.S. Ambassador to the Netherlands. At the time, Mr. Arnault's firm, AmeriQuest, was being investigated by regulators in 30 states for predatory lending. Then Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Republican Senator Richard Lugar consented to a request by Democrats that October to delay voting on the nominee because of the investigations. Senator Joseph Biden spoke out in favor of the delay, as did Senator Paul Sarbanes, who cited, quote, long-standing precedent for delaying a vote until the nominee was, quote, clear. Mr. Arnault was eventually voted out of committee after Republicans concluded the investigation did not target the nominee personally. But he was not confirmed by the full Senate until the following February, 7 months after he was nominated, when his company agreed to end investigations by settling the cases against it. My friend President Obama, who nominated Mr. Mayorkas, was a member of the Foreign Relations Committee at that time. Then he seemed to agree that nominees facing investigation should not receive a vote. A 2006 L.A. Times story on Mr. Arnault's confirmation quoted then Senator Obama's spokesman as saying, because a settlement has been reached, Senator Obama will not seek to block his nomination. A vote on another Bush nominee, Lester Crawford, was delayed for 2 months in 2005 while the Inspector General of the Food and Drug Administration probed allegations that Mr. Crawford had an affair with a co-worker and gave her preferential treatment. Once again, the OIG review was complete. The OIG concluded that the allegations could not be substantiated, and the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee voted to confirm him. And in 2004, the Senate Banking Committee did not schedule a vote on Alphonso Jackson to serve as chairman of the Department of Housing and Urban Development until the HUD Inspector General determined Mr. Jackson had not violated the department's workplace violence policy as subordinates had alleged. All of this advises us strongly to delay a vote on Mr. Mayorkas until the OIG investigation into his alleged actions is concluded. I would suggest that we should learn from history and not move forward with this nomination. If it was true for the Senate then, and if it was true for Senator Biden, if it was true for Senator Obama, if it was true for their colleagues and many senators who maintain this precedent until today, it should be true for us now. Last week, when Mr. Mayorkas was considered by the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, my chairman justified moving forward with the nomination by asserting that the DHS OIG had not identified any criminal wrongdoing by Mr. Mayorkas. At present, the DHS OIG is only considering allegations of conflicts of interest, misuse of position, mismanagement, and the appearance of impropriety. In none of those situations I identified were the nominees under criminal investigation. Yet the Senate delayed its vote until each investigation was finished. Since the DHS OIG has not completed its investigation, we don't know if there will ultimately be any criminal findings, and I doubt that there will. We do know, based on the precedent that I just cited, an investigation into any potential wrongdoing, whether criminal or not, is enough for the Senate to delay a vote on an important nominee, or at least it used to be. Of course, the Senate recently changed. The majority leader exercised the so-called nuclear option, changing the rules by breaking the rules, granting my colleagues new power to push through administration nominees through the confirmation process with a simple majority. And the leader is attempting to use this new power to push through scores of nominees in the last few days of this session. But scrutiny and judgment should not be diminished in a partisan rush to get one's way. Forget the rest of the nominees. This is one that an open investigation is currently underway. With this nominee before us, Mr. Mayorkas would do well to wait for all the facts. And as we all know, the DHS OIG is also currently under investigation. They're reviewing this office, the leader who recently resigned. They're reviewing allegations of conflicts of interest, misuse of position, mismanagement of the EB-5 investor visa program, and an appearance of impropriety. They're all serious concerns. I hope they aren't true. But right now, we don't have all the facts. While I understand the OIG is not currently aware of any criminal activity, since the investigation is still open and several interviews remain, that could possibly change. As I understand, however, the OIG plans to complete its investigation and release its findings in a few short months. Until then, we won't know what is just an allegation and what will be proven by evidence and facts. Most concerning to me is the fact that the White House failed to alert myself or the committee chairman to the fact that Mr. Mayorkas was under investigation, which they had an obligation to do. In fact, the letter from White House counsel conveniently doesn't confirm or deny whether the President was aware Mr. Mayorkas was even under investigation. It is unclear to me why Chairman Carper wasn't troubled by the White House being less than honest with him about a nominee he was expected to fast-track for nomination. My staff has spoken to a number of whistleblowers from within DHS who have concerns about Mr. Mayorkas' fitness for position. These whistleblowers have made serious allegations about how Mr. Mayorkas has overseen and influenced the EB-5 program. They aren't just allegations, but they do raise questions. They raise questions about his allegiance to DHS's core mission to prevent terrorism and enhance security. A number of the allegations extend well beyond the EB-5 program and raise concerns about the fitness for the number 2 position at DHS. They include the following: attempt by Mr. Mayorkas to obstruct investigations by Congress, allegations of preventing program integrity measures requested by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, intimidation of employees who questioned agency policies, susceptibility to political influence, failing to properly enforce program integrity mechanisms resulting in potential threats to national security. Whistleblowers who spoke to the Wall Street Journal said that Mr. Mayorkas fast-tracked approvals of certain EB-5 applications over objections regarding the suspicious source of funds to rebuild the casino in Las Vegas, which in fact was noted in a recent article by the Washington Times, which I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record.
Without objection.
I understand that some of my colleagues on the other side are frustrated that the whistleblowers have not come forward to speak with them. To be clear, I have communicated